Hi, I'm Alexa Posney, Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. I'm here to talk with you about Part C of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, otherwise known as IDEA. The Part C program provides early intervention services to infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families. We recognize that the field has been waiting a very long time for the IDEA Part C early intervention regulations, and I'm excited to announce that the final regulations are scheduled to be published in the Federal Register on Wednesday, September 28, 2011. These regulations will help improve the lives of our youngest children. President Barack Obama said, "Unless we take action, unless we step up, there are countless children who will never realize their full talent and potential. I do not accept that future for them." It's been 4 years since we've received comments from over 600 parties on the proposed Part C regulations. And believe me, we heard you. We took your comments very, very seriously. Before I begin to talk about some of the changes made to Part C, I'd like to mention that in general, we have attempted to clarify many complex issues and restructured the regulations in a way that families, early intervention service providers, and states can read, understand, and implement the changes. As I begin, I think it's important to point out a few things that you will not be surprised to learn. That we regulated on long-standing policies and best practices from the field of early intervention. First, we have specified that if a particular early intervention service cannot be provided satisfactorily in a natural environment, a justification must be included on the Individualized Family Service Plan, or IFSP, and must be based on the child's outcomes. We have incorporated requirements that apply to Part C through Part B. That is, if a state is required under state law to provide a free appropriate public education, or FAPE, for services to children with disabilities under the age of 3, the state must ensure that those services that constitute FAPE are provided at no cost. We have also allowed the sharing of limited data for child find purposes between the agencies responsible for administering Part C and B in order to help with the seamless transition of children with disabilities between these programs. We've clarified that a lead agency must maintain a current listing of the names and positions of agency employees who may have access to personally identifiable information. Arnie has said, first, we must invest in early childhood education. Too many children show up for kindergarten already behind. Many never catch up. By focusing on improving outcomes for infants and toddlers with disabilities, we are investing in their futures. Arnie and I believe that we must focus on improving outcomes for infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families. We know that by improving outcomes, the rates of development will increase, and children may exit the Part C program before the age of 3 with the skills expected for preschool and eventually kindergarten. The Walkabouts once wrote a song that said, "Come back now, lay all your burdens down, and with a little luck, I'll lift your burdens up." Along with our focus on improving child outcomes, this administration is committed to reducing burden on states. When reading the Part C final regulations, you will see that we have reduced burden in the areas of state application requirements, permitting the use of screening, and clarifying the service coordinator's role, just to mention a few. Additionally, increasing state flexibility was important to us. In a number of areas, we provide options to states. Dispute resolution, extending Part C services to children over the age of 3, and the use of records to establish eligibility are just a few of the areas where we have been able to make some changes. Now, to talk more specifically about the Part C regulations, please know that it would be impossible to name all the key changes, so I'll focus on changes in a few key areas, including family engagement, child find and eligibility, use of insurance, confidentiality, timelines, and the term multidisciplinary. As I share with you some of the key changes, I'll also talk about some of the comments we received and why we made the changes we did. Number 1, the first key changes are in the area of family engagement. In response to the commenter's request for clarification as to when the general notice and confidentiality requirements apply, it was determined that the lead agency must provide parents with an initial notice when a child is referred to Part C that informs parents about their rights under the IDEA Part C confidentiality provisions and a summary of the record maintenance, destruction, retention, and storage policies. Additionally, To clarify the procedures a state lead agency must follow if it is determined that a child is not eligible for Part C services, we made the following change. If it is determined, after conducting an evaluation, that a child is not an infant or toddler with a disability, the lead agency must provide the parent with prior written notice, including information about the parent's right to dispute the eligibility determination through the IDEA Part C dispute resolution mechanisms. Another change was made to ensure that no-cost protections regarding the right to evaluations, assessments, and IFSP development were comparable with the Part B requirements. Specifically, a participating agency must provide, at no cost to the parent, a copy of each evaluation, assessment of the child, family assessment, and IFSP as soon as possible after each IFSP meeting. We received several comments from state lead agencies expressing concern with the proposed 20-day timeline between when a parent requests their child's early intervention records and when that request would need to be honored. Commenters particularly felt it was important for parents to have these records available in the event there is a pending due process hearing, which must be resolved within a 30-day timeline. In response, the final regulations stipulate that if a parent requests to inspect and review the early intervention records of his or her child, that request must be honored in no more than 10 days after the parent makes the request. And it's important that I point out that the transition plan from Part C to Part B 619 is not a separate document. This section is part of the IFSP. The IFSP team must determine the appropriate steps for the child to exit the program and any transition services needed. The family is a member of the IFSP team and therefore must be included in the development of the transition plan. Number 2, the second key change is in the area of child find and eligibility. States must make the central directory of early intervention services accessible to the general public, that is, through the lead agency's website and other appropriate means. The information must be accurate and up to date, and the early intervention services, professional and other groups that provide services to infants and toddlers with disabilities, and research and demonstration projects being conducted in the state related to infants and toddlers with disabilities must be included. We did not make any changes from what was proposed, yet I would like to point out that the phrase, "other appropriate means," was originally included because we recognize that needs vary from state to state, and that each state is in the best position to determine the additional appropriate means that the lead agency will use to make the directory accessible. Primary referral sources must refer a child to the Part C program as soon as possible, but in no case more than 7 calendar days after identification of potential eligibility. I'll talk more about this later when I discuss timelines. We also know that some infants and toddlers with disabilities have already gone through a series of screenings, evaluations, and assessments prior to the referral to Part C. Therefore, states are now permitted to use those records to determine eligibility for early intervention services. Number 3, the third key change is in the use of insurance. As you know, the current regulations do not clarify when or how public benefits or insurance or private insurance may be used, and this is the area in which the department received the most number of comments. Commenters raised concerns regarding parents' no-cost protection rights and confidentiality. The White House, the Secretary, and I all feel very strongly that children's and parents' no-cost protection rights and confidentiality provisions are protected, and at the same time that resources are maximized in order to pay for services under Part C of the IDEA. Our response: regarding the use of public insurance and benefits to pay for Part C services, we have added 3 new requirements that provide important protections for parents of infants and toddlers with disabilities. First, a state must obtain a parent's consent prior to requiring a parent to enroll in a public benefits or insurance program, and may not require the parent to enroll in such a program in order to receive Part C services. Second, if the use of public benefits or insurance imposes certain costs on the parent, then parental consent must be obtained for its use. And third, if a state lead agency or early intervention service, an EIS provider or program, uses public benefits or insurance to pay for Part C services, the state must provide written notice to parents of the applicable confidentiality and no-cost protections. And generally, parental consent must be obtained prior to accessing a parent's private insurance unless the state has adopted specific statutory no-cost protections. The fourth key change is in regard to parents' and children's confidentiality rights. Lead agencies, state educational agencies, or SEAs, and local educational agencies, LEAs, have a clear responsibility to identify children potentially eligible for services under Part B of IDEA and to ensure a smooth transition from the state's Part C program to the Part B program. As Andrew Carnegie once said, teamwork is the ability to work together toward a common vision. It is the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results. Our common goal and vision are to create the best future possible for our infants and toddlers with disabilities. With that in mind, the Part B and Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA, confidentiality provisions are adopted to apply to Part C with some minor adjustments, such that participating agencies that provide Part C services have access to Part C records to provide services and must comply with confidentiality protections once a child is referred to Part C. We have modified some provisions to reflect the urgency of obtaining information quickly, given the shorter time period that children spend in the Part C program compared to the Part B program. Additionally, the lead agency must, without prior parental consent, provide the LEA for Part C toddlers potentially eligible for Part B services the basic child find information that would otherwise be personally identifiable information, unless the state has elected to adopt an opt-out policy. However, some commenters urge the department to require a lead agency to obtain parental consent prior to disclosing any information to an LEA or SEA, as this child find information, when disclosed to a non-participating agency, is considered personally identifiable information. Therefore, the state may adopt an opt-out policy that would provide parents an opportunity to object to the disclosure of such information. And if the parent objects within a specified time frame, disclosure of the information would be barred. We made these changes to balance the confidentiality rights of parents against the need for state flexibility and the IDEA mandate to identify all children in need of services at the earliest opportunity, and to ensure a seamless transition of children from the Part C program to the Part B program where possible. The fifth key change includes 4 major timeline provisions. Please know that in each of these timelines, we balance the importance of identifying children as early as possible against the ability of states to implement what is feasible and reasonable without undue burden. The first, the referral timeline. Some commenters pointed out that the proposed timeline, as soon as possible, could potentially introduce long delays into the Part C referral process and that it may be more difficult to enforce. The department retained the language as soon as possible, but established a maximum timeline of 7 days as a compromise to the suggestions that ranged from 3 to 10 business days. The 45-day timeline. The department retained the 45-day timeline from referral, not consent as proposed, to the initial IFSP meeting. However, in order to address the concerns of the commenters, we have included limited exceptions when the 45-day timeline will not apply. This helps states continue to ensure timely evaluations and initial IFSP team meetings without unduly burdening Part C programs. It also recognizes that a child's illness or family emergency is outside of the state's control. In those circumstances, the state must still hold the initial IFSP team meeting as soon as possible following the extenuating circumstances. The third timeline, the initiation of early intervention services as identified on the IFSP. The IFSP must include the projected dates for the initiation of each early intervention services. Parental consent is required before the provision of early intervention services. Those services must then be provided as soon as possible after parental consent is obtained. Additionally, given that the department did not propose another timeline and did not receive comments regarding a specific timeline, the as soon as possible language was retained. The language, as soon as possible, recognizes such various factors as the availability of service providers and the needs of the family. Data obtained from the state performance plan and the annual performance report show that the vast majority of states have adopted a de facto 30-day timeline for the initiation of services. And the fourth timeline relates to transition. In response to comments from parent groups and LEAs regarding the timeline for transition to Part B services, which requires a referral to Part B, which would have to provide parents with Part B procedural safeguards and obtain parental consent for evaluation, the department decided not to move forward with the proposed 9 months. Commenters felt the proposed 9 months was far too early for the LEA notification for children potentially eligible for Part B. Rather, 90 days made the most sense as an outside timeline given the following IDEA Part B timelines. Think about an individualized education program, or IEP, must be developed and implemented by age 3 for a child exiting Part C and eligible under Part B. Part B also has a 60-day or other state-established timeline to evaluate a child after parental consent is provided. And Part B has a 30-day timeline to implement the IEP. The LEA notification timeline aligns with the transition conference timeline. A transition conference must occur for children exiting Part C and potentially eligible for Part B services not later than at least 90 days, but not more than 9 months prior to the toddler's 3rd birthday. And last but not least, the use of the term multidisciplinary. Regarding the proposed definition of multidisciplinary as it relates to the IFSP team, we agreed with the commenters' concerns that one individual, even if that individual is qualified in more than one discipline or profession, could not serve as the sole member of the IFSP team. We agreed that this was not best practice and therefore required that the IFSP team be comprised of the parent and 2 or more individuals from separate disciplines or professions, with one of these individuals being the service coordinator. As some say, there is no I in team. And to echo Ken Blanchard, none of us is as smart as all of us. Regarding the multidisciplinary evaluations, one individual who is qualified in more than one discipline or profession may conduct a multidisciplinary evaluation and assessment. This is a change from current regulations, which require 2 or more individuals, but this has not changed from what was proposed in the NPRM, which was intended to provide states with needed flexibility. So, let me say that we have made key changes in the early intervention program to improve results for young children with disabilities, to reduce burden where possible, and to increase state flexibility and options, all the while ensuring state accountability for child find and provision of early intervention services to infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families. Let me just end with one final thought. In one of my favorite Family Circus cartoons, as the dad sits reading the newspaper, he says, "Sometimes I worry about the future of this country." And as the mom gazes out the window at the children playing, reading, and drawing, she calmly states, "I don't." Well, to echo that thought, I don't either. Let's just remember that their minds are in our hands. We are planning a multifaceted rollout and technical assistance strategy to help families understand and states effectively implement the new requirements. Over the next several months, we will be doing webinars, technical assistance documents, and a full-day training. The full-day training will be on November 16th, prior to the Division of Early Childhood Conference. The DEC conference will be held in the D.C. area at the Gaylord Hotel at the National Harbor. Information about registering for the training session is available on the TADNet website. Thank you again for your time and patience. We look forward to sharing more information on Part C over the next few months.